Greetings everyone, DonTheCrown here, and today I want to talk about the Legion patch notes. I just got done streaming and reading through all the patch notes, and it took a long freaking time. Unfortunately, the patch notes this time around was about 13,000 words long, which is about the equivalent of 1/10 of a Lord of the Rings book. So I figured I'd make a video that kind of summarizes a lot of the changes without getting too in depth. So this is pretty much my guide to TLDR patch notes, if you would. So let's talk real quick about the new things they added. There's a new subsite, a new type of skill gem called travel gems. Now a lot of the travel gems are things that we're already familiar with. These are gems that pretty much are used primarily just for travel. So leap slam, whirling blades, lightning warps, things of this nature. They've added two new gems. One is Dash, which we've already seen previewed before, which does like kind of a short blink, and then Frost Blink, which kind of does cold damage in an area around you, and then blinks you somewhere else. And the cooldown is reduced for how many people are hit by, or how many enemies are hit by the original blink. And these are part of the blink subtype, which also includes Flame Dash, and they all share cooldowns. So you can't necessarily like spam all of these together. Another type of gem that they've added are the guard skills. Now, the only new skill gem here is called Steel Skin. Steel Skin pretty much is a like on-demand press, instantaneous cast damage reduction. And the other two are Molten Shell and Immortal Call, which have both been reworked and changed in big ways. TLDR, Molten Shell gives you kind of a buffer of HP that are kind of like a shield almost of damage that is based off your armor, whereas Immortal Call, as opposed to making you 100% immune to physical damage, will make you take less physical and elemental damage with an increasing amount of physical damage reduced based off how many endurance charges you sacrifice when you use it, up to 5 endurance charges. They've also added new auras like Blood and Sand and Flesh and Stone, which make use of these blood and sand stances, which is pretty much like a toggleable aura effect that'll be happening once you have Blood and Sand activated. In Blood Stance, you'll do less area of effect, but more damage with Blood and Sand, but more area of effect with less damage in Sand Stance. In Flesh and Stone, things around you will be maimed in Blood Stance, whereas in Stone Stance, things that are nearby you will be blinded, and things that are not affected by the blind will do less damage to you. They've also added the Precision Aura as a actual skill gem now. This was originally only on a necklace, and for a flat mana cost, you were able to get accuracy and critical strike chance, which is a pretty good aura. And the last new aura is called Pride, where enemies take additional, like more physical damage, and this stacks up as they spend more time around you. So I think this is going to be really popular amongst pure melee, like physical attack builds. They also have added additional support gems, such as Pulverized Support, where you do more damage, more area, but less attack speed. So it kind of like makes you hit bigger and harder, but you do it slower. They've also added Rage Support, where you gain rage when you hit with a skill, and you do damage based on rage. So rage is not just for berserkers anymore. They've also added Impale Support, finally, which increases your chance to impale with the skill. It increases Impale Infect and gives you more damage. Really great support gem. I really wish we'd had this for a long time. And there are two support gems that lock down your skill to specific weapon types. So we have Shockwave, which locks it down to being a mace or staff, and makes things kind of like explode on kill, but it's not really like destroying the corpse here. It just kind of does extra damage around it. I don't necessarily see this being too amazing. And the other one is Close Combat, which is locked down to axes and swords. And this increases the damage to enemies the closer you are to them, and gives you a buff so that you have the next travel skill you use will be faster. There's also new skill gems such as Blade Storm, which has kind of been the darling of the previews for Legion League, where in Blood Stance you stack up these storms that have an increased chance to bleed and pretty much stick in one spot, whereas in Sand Stance these tornadoes kind of like roam around. There's also Perforate, which was recently announced today. It pretty much does a big damage in one spot, kind of like spikes coming out of the ground. Or in Sand Stance, they kind of spread out, kind of in like star shape. There's also Chain Hook, where you grapple onto an enemy and you generate rage and you pull yourself to them. And there is Berserk, which consumes your rage and you gain damage, attack, and movement speed, and damage reduction, and your character gets bigger. The only downside to this is it definitely consumes your rage at like an increasing pace, and eventually you will run out, and you cannot turn off Berserk until your like rage is completely consumed. Other general changes to the game are like things like animation canceling, where your skills will have like a new animation type of style where before and after you're actually doing damage, you can cancel the skill by using a different skill, especially movement skills, and you can actually kind of like cut off the end of your attack animations with movement skills in order to kind of move a little bit quicker. There's also kind of like the new strike animation, whereas all like single target melee skills, which only used to hit one target, will now hit every target that's kind of like in the range of their weapon. And so this will take a little bit to get used to these two things, because it's very different from our like old name locking single target melee skills. The last little thing that they did was stun adjustment, where melee and physical damage is much more likely to stun, I believe 25%, whereas non-physical damage is 25% less likely to stun. Next up, they've also changed a lot of the skill gems that are like for melee to two different kinds, like maybe 2 or 3 different like different types. I've kind of like designated them as fast and light and slow and heavy. And so in the fast and light category, and every single one you see here that's a star next to it has had added flat damage to the gem. So Cyclone, for example, is now channeled, has more attack speed and area, and has that added flat damage. Blade Flurry has added flat damage. However, it has less damage effectiveness and base damage, but seems like slightly more AoE. Charge Dash, pretty much to just increase the damage effect. Flicker Strike now has a chance to get Frenzy on hit, which I think is pretty amazing, and will definitely help you maintain those Frenzy charges. And then Frenzy, the actual skill, gives you more damage and attack speed per charge. And I think Frenzy has the potential to be extremely strong, especially with large amounts of Frenzy charges. Next group of skills are what I call the slow and heavy. Now, most of these have been slowed down in terms of like their just total overall attack. There's a new like attack modifier that like will slow down most of these gems compared to their normal attack speed, like with your auto attack. But generally, they've had more damage effectiveness, more flat damage to kind of make up for these. Now, some of these have special stuff that's going on, like Lacerate definitely also depends on the stance between blood and sand, like you have a chance to bleed versus like bigger AoE. Shield Charge has kind of a big buff in terms that now that is based off of shield damage, and it works with wands. And honestly, I expect to see some face breakers flying around using this like very strong shield charge. Cleave now has had its threshold changed to add radius as opposed to area. Double Strike and Vol Double Strike now have 25% chance to bleed. Dual Strike has a whole list of buffs, a lot of them around crit and dealing damage to enemies that have full life. Earthquake has a bigger aftershock that does more damage, and then a lot of other things just have a lot more damage in general. Like Heavy Strikes has more melee range and a ton more damage. Ice Crash has more base area that's larger and has flat cold damage, which is different than most of these other things that have flat physical. Lancing Steel now has 30% chance for the non-primary projectiles to impale. Puncture has more damage with bleeding. And Smite has pretty much significantly received a lot of damage effectiveness. It is like extremely high, especially considering that Smite itself does grant you additional like flat damage. Sunder has had its like old range nerf reverted, and it seems to be like a little bit slower, but maybe a little bit more damage than before. So I could see Sunder leveling coming back. Sweep knocks everything back every time now. And Tectonic Slam, a personal favorite, is having its primary fissure to be longer, while the secondary is going to be shorter. But there's going to be more AoE available on the tree than ever before, or even in Ascendancy classes. So I have a feeling that Tectonic Slam is going to be huge this league. Next up are a bunch of skills that kind of fall into the middle ground. So there's like Dominating Blow, Frost Blades, Glacial Hammer. A lot of these have had flat elemental damage added to them and slight changes. For example, Reeve has earlier radius as you're leveling up, and now you lose stacks over time as opposed to losing them all at once, which is great quality of life, although Reeve will probably still not feel very great to level with. Viper Strike has had like flat chaos damage added to it, and then damage effectiveness has been lowered. However, you convert 50% of the damage now. And then last but not least, the nerf skills. Molten Strike has pretty much been destroyed in my personal opinion. You can no longer Ancestral Call overlap because you must make melee contact with a target in order to generate projectiles. So you can't swing at the air anymore and have projectiles pop out and have your Ancestral Call also hit the target and create projectiles as well. And then the projectiles that you do create are doing 50% less damage. So it's just an incredible nerf to Molten Strike, and it's probably maybe still playable, but it's going to not be anywhere near as good. Hoag has had less damage as well, and Winter Orb will now shoot half as fast when you're not channeling and be the same as it was before when you are channeling. So it'll be a little bit less powerful when you're just channeling it up and powering it up and running around. The duration has also been changed. I'm not sure like mathematically how much longer or shorter that's going to be, but it seems like Winter Orb has been dialed back a little bit, but maybe not enough. There's also a few support gems that have been reworked, such as Melee Splash, which is generally kind of the same, Multi-Strike, which does a lot less attack speed. However, the repeats will do 40 and then 80% more damage. So overall, your DPS should kind of remain the same as well, just might be a little bit less fast. Fortify will now give more melee damage. However, it's not very much, so you probably will still try to squeeze this in on a movement skill unless you're in hardcore. Infused Channeling now supports the physical gem type, which has recently been added, and no longer gives implicit physical damage reduction unless you're channeling a physical skill like Cyclone or Blade Flurry. Next up, let's talk about the Ascendancy changes. Juggernaut has had damage increases for 5 to 8% damage per endurance charge and 5 to 6% area for endurance charge on its one node. Occultist Wicked Ward has been removed completely. Vile Bastion is now capped at 10%, and there's no flat ES. Also, all minor ES nodes in the Ascendancy tree have been reduced by 2%. Guardian has had the similar minor ES nerf, and then Ascendant has had some updates as well. Zerker now has Rage on hit. Chieftain Ash, chance to have covered in ash is now to 20%. And there's 40% increased fire damage. The champion now has 20% chance to impale, and Gladiator has 15% chance to block and 10% chance to blind. Also, there's some changes to monsters. Magic monsters now have 50% more life at level 1, up to 75% more life at level 68 and above. Rare monsters have 35% more life at level 1 and up to 100% more life at level 68 and above. They also grant 54% more experience. This is definitely going to be a big impactor on clear speed, as the overall life of the monsters has gone up quite significantly, and I'm sure this probably scales with things such as minion life, and I'm sure Delve itself, which scales minion life, will be very noticeably different with these changes. Incursions now give you 12 incursions to finish up your temple. The Atlas has been reshuffled, and so all the maps are in different places now. And you can unlock a 5-slot map device somehow in the updated patch. We're not really sure just how. It might have something to do with the League, so it might not be something that's available in Standard right away. And also the passive tree, especially on the southern side, has been massively reworked. I'm not going to cover everything because it took me about an hour just to read through all of the nodes when I did it earlier on stream. And there's just a ton of reworks, tons of things for melee. There are some things as well on the north side for like staves and wands and even some spell stuff. But definitely you want to give it a check out for yourself, especially if you're looking to go one of these melee builds. That's it for the quick patch notes. I'm sorry that it couldn't do it in any shorter than this. It was a very extensive patch, but if you think I missed anything or have any comments, please feel free to leave them down below. What nerfs or buffs are you most excited about right now, and what are you looking to start the league off with? And as always, you can catch me here or at twitch.tv/DonTheCrown. Have a great one.